Ever, like, really stop and think about how kids learn to talk.
Right.
It's kind of wild when you think about it.
Yeah.
They're like, wait until they have perfect grammar before opening their mouths, right?
Right.
They're just like, blah, blah, blah. Mistakes everywhere.
But what if those, like, fumbles, those little slip-ups, what if those are actually, like, essential to figuring out how language works, I mean?
Yeah.
That's what we're going to dig into today, this whole idea of, like, let's talk when it comes to learning a new language,
Yeah.
focusing on actually talking, like diving right into conversation, even if it gets a little messy.
Yeah.
And get this, there's like actual research to back this up. We're going to be looking at some seriously fascinating studies.
It's a really exciting area of research. It really, like, shakes things up, you
Yeah.
know, especially that traditional idea that accuracy is, like, everything.
Right, like ditch the textbook, forget the flashcards, just start chatting it up. Okay, but before we get too carried away, we got to acknowledge the other side of the coin, right? That whole get it right from the beginning camp. Exactly. And it's not just about being strict for no reason, like a lot of times this comes from this idea that learners need a really clear, really correct model to build from.
Right.
So it's like, imagine learning to play, I don't know, piano, right? You're not going to just jump right into like jazz improv, right?
Probably not.
Like you got to get those scales down first, right?
Okay, yeah. Okay, I see what you mean. You need that solid foundation for sure.
Exactly.
So we've got these two, like, seemingly opposite sides, perfect grammar versus dive in and chat. But what happens when we put them to the test?
Yeah.
Well, there's this 1985 study by Long and Porter, really interesting stuff. They took Spanish speakers learning English
Okay.
and paired them up, at different levels, some beginners, some more advanced.
Right.
And get this, some even got to chat with native English speakers. And you know what they found?
What?
Those learners, they made just as many errors talking to each other as they did with those native speakers.
Wow.
Right? Like, completely throws a wrench in things, doesn't it?
It really does.
So is all that emphasis on perfect grammar from the get-go, is it, like, kind of pointless? What do you think?
It really makes you question that assumption, that you absolutely have to have constant, perfect input to learn.
Right.
And I think what's so important here is it highlights how valuable that real, genuine communication is.
Yeah.
Remember that whole idea of like negotiating for meaning?
Yeah.
That's what these learners were doing. They were actively working to understand each other.
Right.
And it turns out that very process, even with all the mistakes and stuff, like that seems to be a huge part of it.
Yeah, it's like the focus shifts. It's not about avoiding every single error. It's about connecting, getting your meaning across, even if it's a little messy.
Yeah, exactly.
So it makes you wonder, does who you're talking to even matter as much as we think?
That's a great question.
I mean, we've got two more studies to get into. One by Ewell and McDonald in 1990 and another by Storch in 2002. They both looked at this whole learner pairing thing, how different pairings affect how people interact.
Okay.
And Ewell and McDonald, they found something super interesting.
Yeah.
Putting a less advanced learner in kind of a more dominant role, with a more advanced learner, actually led to more, I don't know, like richer conversation.
Really? That's fascinating.
Right. Why do you think that would be?
It seems kind of backwards, right? But I guess when you think about it, if the stronger speaker, so to speak, takes a step back,
Yeah.
it like forces that less fluent speaker to really step up. They can't just rely on the other person to carry the conversation.
So it's like a language learning boot camp. You're thrown in the deep end and you got to swim, basically.
Uh-huh. I like that.
And this is where it gets really wild, because Storch's research, it took this idea even further.
Oh.
She found that how we interact, like the dynamics of the conversation,
Yeah.
that might actually matter even more than who you're chatting with.
Wow.
I know, right?
So interesting.
So tell us more about Storch's findings. What were these different interaction styles, and which ones actually help people learn better?
Well, Storch found that there were these 4 main patterns that kept coming up. So you've got collaborative, which is like everyone's actively participating, right?
Right.
Then there's dominant. It's less like a conversation and more like, well, a competition.
Yeah, I've definitely had those conversations.
And then you've got dominant passive. So like one person is really running the show and the other is just kind of along for the ride.
Okay.
And then finally, there's the expert novice pattern. So it's more like, a kind of mentoring vibe.
Okay.
And guess what?
What?
It was those learners in the collaborative and expert novice pairs, those were the ones who really retained more of the language.
Wow.
Yeah. It seems like those styles encouraged everyone to be more active, really engaged with the learning process.
That makes a lot of sense.
And it really reminds me of Vygotsky's theory.
Yeah. That whole idea that we learn best through collaborating and scaffolding,
Yeah.
having someone there to kind of, I don't know, guide us, but not do it all for us.
Right. Like, you need that support, but you got to do the work, too.
Exactly.
So it's not just about, like, any interaction, right? It's got to be the right kind of interaction, the quality, the dynamics, all that stuff.
Exactly.
Okay, so we're seeing a theme here. Interaction, even with those inevitable slip-ups, has some serious upsides.
Definitely.
But do we know anything about how this let's talk approach actually plays out in the long run?
We do. That's where Mackey's 1999 research comes in.
Okay.
She had learners working with native speakers, but here's the twist. They had different levels of interaction, different types of feedback.
Interesting.
And you know what? The groups who had those really dynamic conversations, those back and forths, where they had to ask questions, clarify things, get that feedback, they were the ones who ended up using way more complex language later on. Hold on. So even though they might have stumbled more in the beginning, all that back and forth, all that feedback, it actually helped them level up their language in the long run.
Exactly.
That's amazing.
Isn't it?
And it's not just in those like lab settings either, right?
Right.
McDonough's research in 2004, he took this into real classrooms.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. In Thailand, actually.
Cool.
His study showed that students who got more what we call negative feedback, and that sounds harsher than it is. It's really just, asking for clarification or getting corrected, right?
Right.
They actually saw more improvement in their grammar.
Wow.
So making more mistakes, but getting that feedback actually helped them master the grammar better in the end.
It really did.
That is wild.
It is. Though there's a bit of irony in McDonough's findings, actually.
Yeah.
Even though the students who were doing more of that group work, getting more of that feedback, even though they improved more, a lot of them didn't actually think it was helping at the time.
Really?
Yeah.
So they were getting better, but they didn't even realize it.
It's like we're not always the best judges of our own learning process,
Wow. That's fascinating. It's like what seems frustrating in the moment, those mistakes, having to ask for help, all that, it can actually be like incredibly beneficial down the line.
Yeah.
This is actually a great place to pause for now, but when we come back, we'll dive even deeper into what all of this means. Stay tuned.
Welcome back. So before the break, we were really getting into this let's talk approach to language learning, all about prioritizing actual conversation,
Yeah.
even if it means, a few bumps along the way.
Right.
And man, the research we've looked at, it's really got me thinking that maybe those little slip-ups, they're not so bad after all.
It really flips the script, doesn't it?
Totally.
On a traditional view of language learning, like it's all about chasing this idea of perfection. But these studies are saying, hey, maybe leaning into that messiness, that back and forth, maybe that's actually the key to really becoming fluent. Yeah, it's like those mistakes everyone's always so worried about.
Right.
Maybe they're not actually mistakes. Maybe they're like stepping stones,
That's a great way to put it.
on the path to fluency.
It's like every time you stumble, you're actually learning something new.
Exactly.
And it all ties back to that idea we were talking about before the break. Remember, negative feedback.
Yeah.
Those moments when you're learning and someone corrects you, or maybe you have to ask for clarification, like if you mispronounce a word or you use the wrong verb tense. And yeah, in the moment, it can feel a little awkward. I get it. But really, those moments, those are like golden opportunities. They're like little nudges pushing you towards a better understanding of the language.
It makes you think, why are we so conditioned to be afraid of making mistakes?
I know, right?
Not just with language, with everything.
It's like it's so ingrained in us,
Right.
But what if, instead of seeing mistakes as failures, we saw them as, like, valuable feedback? Like little signposts pointing us in the right direction.
It's like that saying, we learn more from our failures than our successes. Maybe it's time we actually started believing it,
Absolutely.
But, okay, just to play devil's advocate for a second, with all this talk about let's talk and embracing mistakes, does that mean, like, grammar rules don't matter anymore?
Yeah.
Like, should we just throw the grammar rule book out the window entirely?
That's a great question, and it's one we hear a lot. And, I get it. It can seem a little confusing. But honestly, the answer is not that simple. It's not really an either thing,
Uh-huh.
It's about finding that balance, that sweet spot between fluency and accuracy.
So it's not one or the other. It's finding a way to have both.
Exactly. It's like, imagine you're learning to dance, right? You wouldn't just spend all your time, like, meticulously practicing each individual step in isolation, would you?
That wouldn't be very fun, would it?
Exactly. At some point, you're going to want to actually, dance.
Right.
You want to put it all together.
Right.
And it's the same with language. You need that solid foundation of technique, of grammar, all that good stuff.
Right.
But you also need to actually practice using the language in real time, in real conversations.
Okay, that is such a good analogy.
Mm-hmm.
So for anyone listening who's like, all right, I'm sold, sign me up for Team Let's Talk, what are some things they can actually do? What are some practical tips for trying out this approach?
Well, based on everything we've been looking at, the biggest thing is to just actively seek out opportunities to interact, to actually use the language.
Okay, so find people to talk to. Makes sense.
Exactly. And remember, it doesn't even have to be with a native speaker. I mean, think back to Storch's study, right?
Yeah.
Even learners at similar levels, they can help each other improve just by talking to each other, by collaborating.
I love that. It really takes the pressure off,
Yeah.
You don't need to find that perfect language partner. It's just about connecting, not being perfect. Okay, so we've talked a lot about this from the learner's perspective. But what about the educators?
Yeah.
Or even, just someone who's in a more experienced position? Like, how can they create an environment that really encourages this kind of interactive learning?
Oh, that is such an important question. And, one of the biggest takeaways from all this research is the importance of creating a safe space for learners to make mistakes.
Yeah.
A space where it's okay to not be perfect, to ask questions, to just try things out and see what happens.
An experiment.
Exactly.
So what you're saying is, it's more than just saying, nope, that's wrong, try again.
Yeah, it's about guiding, not just correcting.
Mhm.
It's about helping learners understand why something isn't quite right, and then showing them how to get closer to that understanding.
So fostering a growth mindset.
Yes, it's
Where mistakes are just, part of the process. They're not failures, they're just stepping stones. And that applies to everything, not just language learning. Learning a new skill, a new software, a new instrument, anything.
I totally agree.
It's like we need to redefine what it even means to know a language.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's not just about memorizing a bunch of rules and vocabulary lists.
Right.
It's about being able to actually use the language.
Yes.
To communicate, to connect with other people.
And that takes practice, like a lot of practice.
Yeah.
And it takes creating those opportunities for real, genuine interaction, to let those conversations happen, even if they're messy, even if they're imperfect. Because that's where the real learning happens.
This has been such a great conversation. Honestly, It's really got me thinking about how I approach everything, not just language learning, but learning in general.
I'm so glad. And the cool thing is, research in this field, it's ongoing.
Right.
There's always more to discover, more to learn. But the research we've looked at today, it really highlights how powerful this Let's Talk approach can be.
Yeah.
Like embracing that real world interaction, even with all the messiness that comes with it. It's like this secret ingredient to really unlocking a language.
Totally. So, and everyone listening, don't be afraid to get out there and make those mistakes, stumble, fumble, try things out. Those moments, those are the moments that are going to help you really grow.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Embrace the journey, embrace the messiness, and most importantly, keep talking.
Okay, folks, on that note, we're actually going to wrap up this episode of The Deep Dive. But before you go, we want to leave you with a final thought-provoking question to ponder. It's funny, we always talk about language learning like it's this thing, separate from everything else. But this whole Let's Talk idea, it's bigger than that, isn't it?
It really is. When you break it down, it's really just about embracing those mistakes, right?
Yeah.
And being open to feedback, really engaging with whatever it is you're trying to learn, not just passively observing.
Mm-hmm.
Those are things that apply whether you're learning a new language or a new software or playing an instrument or, heck, even just navigating relationships.
It's like we've unlocked the secret code to learning, to growth. And it's not even a secret, really.
Right.
You don't need any special equipment or anything. Just be willing to put yourself out there, you know, make those mistakes, keep that conversation going. So as we wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you with one final thought-provoking question. We spent all this time talking about how this Let's Talk approach can revolutionize language learning.
Right.
But think about your own life for a second. Where else could you benefit from just diving in a little more?
Ooh, that's a good one.
You know, embracing that let's talk mentality.
Well, maybe it's at work, like you're trying to tackle a new project.
Yeah.
And instead of getting stuck in that mindset of like, it's gotta be perfect, you reach out, you get your colleagues involved,
Yeah.
you brainstorm, you bounce ideas off each other, even if they're not fully formed yet.
So it's like shifting from I need to have all the answers
Yeah.
to let's figure this out together.
Exactly.
I love that.
Because who knows, right? You might be surprised by what you come up with.
So whether you're trying to master a new language or level up your skills at work or just, navigate the world with a little more confidence, remember, keep talking, keep interacting, and don't shy away from those mistakes. Who knows what you might discover? That's it for this deep dive. Thanks for joining us.